Did you know that the average age of bridges in the United States is approaching the end of their intended design life? That's right. Across the U.S., over 60,000 bridges are already classified as structurally deficient. Owners and taxpayers, they're facing hundreds of millions of dollars of repair or worse, catastrophic collapse. Or maybe not. Enter advanced analytics technology innovation, the use of structural monitoring technology that is quickly eliminating an entire culture of fear and hugely expensive construction costs by using knowledge and data to prevent unnecessary repair. The reason? Structurally deficient bridges can often be in much better condition than assumed by traditional visual inspection procedures. Greetings, everyone. It's Tuesday, June 17, 2014, and this is Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mantella. I'm your guest host, Frank Baia. Up to the Tech Talk, structural monitoring technology. Once impossible, today is achieving by analyzing more accurate, objective, and timely on-bridge sensor-based information what couldn't be done by traditional visual inspection. In fact, one of TAG's top 40 most innovative companies in Georgia, LifeSpan Technology, is leading this new cutting-edge industry and helping bridge and other structural owners safely defer expense maintenance actions or worse, major capital expenditures. Up to the Tech Talk, why structural monitoring is changing the value proposition in U.S. transportation and the impact of analytics on yet another new technological capability, changing the future of tomorrow's digital economy. We speak with Peter Vanderzee, President and CEO of LifeSpan Technologies. Peter has directed the development of the company while defining the most appropriate use of structural monitoring technology in this emerging market. Considered an industry thought leader, he has authored over 15 publications and white papers while making over 200 presentations to structural owners, engineering consultants, regulatory agencies, elected politicians, and international conferences in the United States, Asia, and in Europe. What is the real condition and the bottom line true cost projected for 60,000 bridges in the U.S. that are analyzed by a visual inspection standard adopted over 40 years ago? Today's Tech Talk may surprise you with both answers and solutions when we speak with LifeSpan Technology President and CEO Peter Vanderzee. This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. Peter, welcome to Tech Talk.
Thank you, Frank. Good to be with you.
It's always an amazing spectrum of innovation that we get an opportunity to explore on Tech Talk. We talk to every vertical, in a lot of cases CEOs and CTOs, healthcare, logistics, fintech, all those kind of things. Today we really get an interesting look into, I think, a high-end specialty that most people may or may not be aware that is being impacted by technology, and that's actual highway infrastructure and I would guess transportation assets that are maintained by government agencies and other organizations. Tell us a little bit about the market of technology as it relates to infrastructure.
Well, this is a new area, Frank, that's really only been growing here for about 10 years now. We provide condition assessment solutions for large transportation assets, such as bridges and tunnels. These solutions that we provide are based on the synergistic fusion of sensors, wireless communication, cloud, analytics, and the Internet to provide structural performance information that was previously unavailable. So in a sense, in today's parlance, we have been providing solutions using the Internet of Things for over a decade now.
You were big data before it was cool.
We were in the cloud before it was sexy. That's correct.
And the other side of it, too, it's predictive analytics.
Exactly right. The bottom line on this is that state DOTs have been using visual inspection protocols to assess condition for over 40 years. But the Federal Highway Administration concluded in a 2000 study that visual inspection was subjective and highly variable. So consequently, structural owners have been using guesstimates of condition to spend $30 to $40 billion each year to repair or replace bridges. And that, frankly, is not acceptable or appropriate in today's funding-constrained environment or with the technology we now have available.
Well, the impact's got to be amazing because, I mean, if nothing else, just to have the best practices and a standard to compare it against from one asset to the other versus what you're saying is being subjective or arbitrary. I hadn't even thought about that, but I guess, you know, you'd like to be assured that most quote-unquote subject experts will give you an objective opinion, but the old joke about 10 economists on a corner will give you a different opinion about the economy. I guess the same thing holds true for transportation assets.
Well, unfortunately, yes. And, you know, we all know this now, those of us in the market, and I don't mean just those technology providers like LifeSpan Technologies, but the owners of these assets, state DOTs and other organizations across the country, intuitively understand the subjective nature of visual inspection, but they have not all adopted the technology yet, so they're still suffering with the idea that a technician with 3 weeks of training can be responsible for driving spending decisions that are in the tens of millions of dollars.
You know, though, certainly not to take anything away from what you're talking about, but it's really, unfortunately, one of the classic problems, I think, in every vertical that deals with any kind of disruptive technology is the culture of quote-unquote legacy systems. You know, a man can make the same mistake for years kind of thing, you know, that the cliche, and call that experience. So let's talk a little bit about that, because what has been the challenge in terms of adoption as far as these kind of technologies are concerned?
Well, if we're asking state DOTs to augment their visual inspection protocol, which of course is mandated by the Federal Highway Administration, that's a very challenging position to be in. And when you combine a new non-FHWA evaluation protocol with additional costs, you'd better offer a value proposition that will have engineers and executives excited, to say the least.
Sure. So a second opinion in this particular case, I'm not saying that it would be secondary to the visual, but in terms of the cultural acceptance, means additional budget expenditure.
Yes, immediately that's true, because a lot of these agencies have what we call silo budgeting practices. And when you're asking for additional monies to do something novel and unique, they have to take it away from other budgeted areas. And I've made the point over and over again that if it was an issue of bridge safety and spending millions and millions of dollars, I think I'd rather have that issue handled than planting more wildflowers.
Well, but you know, and I know you do, because you're on where the tire meets the road, literally, figuratively, but they'll work on the risk factor of, well, what's the prospect of that possibly happening, you know, kind of thing. So unfortunately, once again, what I'm thinking as you're talking about, I know that I had a brief political career, served as a city councilman for a while in the city I live in, and one of the things that was grants, and that there were criteria to meet up with those grants, and a lot of the grants had to do with infrastructure. What happens when can you, in a sense, advance the criteria to define what you're doing in a way that would allow you to, you know, get into what are already, I'm going to call legacy systems, methods of, because I'm guessing even the budgets are basically precedent and not projection as far as these kind of things are concerned.
Well, there are a lot of very subtle issues involved in this. First of all, of course, the FHWA mandated protocol, inspection protocol. And we have never advocated stopping that. We think it's a good first line of defense, much like your doctor would use a blood pressure cuff or a tongue depressor. But when you're unsure of the diagnosis, then it's time to turn to the more definitive technologies, such as an X-ray or an MRI. And we like to think of ourselves as sort of an MRI for bridges, tunnels, and other transportation assets. We're able to pinpoint condition much more effectively than any other process that's being used today.
So you use analogies like that in comparison, because again, where I'm going to, much like a lot of the other challenges of new technologies, in effect, who are you selling into? Because if you're selling into engineers, a lot of the design components and the criteria that you've been describing for the methodology you use to gather the data and even, I'm sure, validate the data is something that, quote-unquote, an engineer might understand. But I know as a general city councilman that made a decision on the budget expenditure, I probably wouldn't get it.
Well, you really hit the nail on the head there, and it requires us to take a two-pronged approach whenever we go to a new client. We have to spend some time with the engineers. They have to understand what we're doing, and they have to appreciate the work that we do and the results that we provide. But they don't sign checks. Consequently, we have to get to the higher levels of those organizations where budgets matter and expenditures matter, and they're looking for a return on investment. So we have fashioned our value proposition along the lines of providing a return on investment. So we can talk not only to the engineers that we have to deal with every day, but to the higher level executives of these owner organizations that really get it in terms of increasing the value of their operations.
Now, one of the things I was exposed to in the great opportunity we get presented to deal with, I call it mental gymnastics in a lot of cases, and so many different innovators, was something called design innovation software, virtualization software, where they were not only designing, say, an exterior look of a building, but literally could go into the entire infrastructure and actually determine what the elements would be and create the actual visual, from the actual software, the architecture and the blueprints, and even set up the list of supplies and do price comparisons. I guess really where I'm going is where does something like this go today, and then where does it go into the future as far as what the possibilities can be?
Well, let's talk about today first. Our biggest market in the area that we think we can provide the most significant impact is embodied in our motto and, in essence, our value proposition, which is safely extending asset life. We think there's enough funding pressure today, and it will be around for at least several more decades, that we have to find a way to get more life out of existing assets. What we do know is that the evaluation and assessment protocols that have been promulgated by organizations such as Federal Highway Administration and AASHTO, which again is a conglomeration of the state DOTs, are very, very conservative. And they were that way, they were designed to be that way on purpose, which is a good thing. I have never said a negative thing about that. They're there for a reason. But that was during the days when we really didn't understand and could know exactly what was going on with these assets. But today, with highly accurate sensing devices, we can tell almost exactly what's going on with an asset, how it's responding to various loads that have been put on it. Whereas, 15 or 20 or even 30 years ago, they were sort of guessing that. They had good reasons to do what they did. They had assumptions they had to follow. But today, we can pinpoint it. So it really is the difference between a blood pressure cuff and an MRI.
And I'm guessing in terms of when you talk about an investment rather than an expense and a return on that investment, you actually do projections not only to what the repairs are, but what they would cost today, as well as waiting. I mean, is that part of the argument in terms of what's submitted?
Yeah. Again, there's a whole range of different outcomes that are possible here. We're finding that 30 to 40% of the structures we evaluate are in better to much better condition than the visual inspection would indicate. That means we can get an extra 10, 15, maybe even 20 more years out of that.
I hadn't even thought about that aspect. I was thinking just the opposite, that the visual inspection didn't see problems that you saw, but you actually are saying in some cases it's seeing things that could wait.
Yes, more often than not, this has been the outcome that we've seen over and over and over again. And what that does is it takes a lot of pressure off the funding cycles that whether it's a county or a city or a state has to deal with in terms of replacing its infrastructure. I mean, we have enough projects we can do to burn all the money we could possibly put into this. But that's not the right answer. The right answer is let's spend the money smart, with good data, with objective information, and when we have an asset that's really in bad shape, let's spend it on fixing that asset. And if we can wait 10 years on another one, we should wait.
That's solid. I mean, that's the kind of logic that overcomes the adoption concerns. I hadn't even, again, coming to a lot of these subjects, Peter, as a tourist, as I often jokingly say, you automatically assume the most limited, sort of the veneer of what an argument might be, not even thinking about the other side of it is, because when you're dealing with deficit budgets and you're dealing with political infrastructures, I'm talking about government infrastructures now, obviously spending money is a genuine concern, and being able to make a decision to not spend money, it's got to sound pretty politically correct as well as a good decision.
Well, an hour ago I was on the phone with a short line railroad in this country that had been given a report by a third-party engineering firm that said they had to spend $1 million on repairing the steel on a 100-year-old bridge, or they couldn't use the bridge at all. And the engineer from that company discussed with me the options that he had to find out what was really happening with that structure, and we'll be promoting a solution with him later this week. And for a modest amount of money, we may be able to save this guy $1 million. Another example is we recently worked on a big signature bridge up in Michigan, and they were getting ready to spend $20 and $30 million on a series of repair items, and we came up with a solution with our engineering partner that probably cost less than $100,000, and they were able to safely defer, say, a $25 million expenditure. Tremendous return on investment.
Tremendous, and I'm sure that word spreads. I mean, we talk about viral marketing and social media. I got a feeling that within those industries and within those government agencies, there's got to be a lot of buzz about LifeSpan.
Well, they're certainly starting that way. I mean, we've slugged this out a long time, and as your listeners undoubtedly will know, whatever you think was going to take a year to do probably takes a lot longer than that. And we've been at this for a decade now. We've gone purposefully at a measured pace without trying to overrun our coverage, so to speak. And we are now seeing changes this year that we have not seen before, which is proactive contacts by customers, glowing recommendations, and acknowledgement. Even today, with the Federal Railroad Administration acknowledged the fact that if we can get better information using sensors and the kind of solutions that we provide, then those are wholly adequate to support deferral of major expenditures. Got
a feeling 10 years ago you wouldn't have been named the Technology Association's most innovative company in Georgia either. So I got a feeling that and as you were talking, I was thinking there's an old philosophy that says if you live long enough, you don't have to be smart. Sooner or later and the other cliche, not to get too corny about it, is that the future is here. It's just not equally distributed. Let's talk. You mentioned the now, but I also mentioned looking into the future, virtualization, and some of the things that are happening in architecture. I'm not saying that's necessarily where you're headed, but where is LifeSpan headed as far as technology solutions? Say, if you can project out long, 10 years out. Another cliche I often say, everything is so 20 minutes ago. Can you actually look out 10 years?
Well, I think we can. We've had a good track record over the last decade, and if I look out at the next 10 years. What I'm seeing is that every state DOT in this country, and probably every railroad, every major railroad, will be routinely deploying these customized solutions before they conduct major repair replacements. And they just can't afford to replace bridges, tunnels, and other transportation assets because an inspection technician presumed the asset was deficient. That's just not good enough anymore. There's no other way to ensure that the transportation funders in America, which is basically the taxpayers, get the biggest bang for their buck unless the owners are absolutely certain about their spending decisions and priorities. Mm-hmm. So, while safety will remain the most critical facet of managing our transportation infrastructure, getting another 10 to 15 years of useful life from a multi-million-dollar asset, we think, is the essence of good stewardship and sustainability.
Well, let's talk, as you were talking, you mentioned earlier about the Internet of Things. Do you actually see this kind of technology being embedded in the original architecture?
Well, we're seeing a little bit of that today. At the present time, we are designing a new monitoring system for a $1.5 billion bridge in New York City. What we're seeing today on these major structures, they're multi-billion dollars typically in cost, is that these systems are embedded from day one. And the point of that is, of course, to understand the bridge's response to various loading scenarios and other things, aging and so forth, and then they can design optimal maintenance programs and replacement programs around an understanding of the bridge and how it reacts over time. So that makes a lot of sense. But for the average run-a-day or average everyday run-of-the-mill bridge, which might be 100 feet long in a county, that kind of system is really not called for. That really becomes overkill. But there are presumed 60,000 structurally deficient bridges in the United States. We think there are only 40,000 when you actually apply the technology to it. But 40,000 bridges gives us a pretty good runway for business over the next 10 to 20 years.
Well, my last question, and unfortunately we're running out of time, I think this has really been extremely interesting and provocative. I think a lot of us just, one of those kind of things you don't really think about until you hear, and then all of a sudden you go, gosh, that's a great idea. That is really a great idea. I was going to ask you what the next step is. I guess I might add, what's the next step besides going public? You know, what's the next step for LifeSpan's business?
Well, we think this year will go down as our breakout year in the business. And we're generating more and more opportunities as the state DOTs and railroads come to an understanding that their spending decisions for repair or replacement of major assets must be supported by objective, precise, and timely understanding of current condition. So we have to be prepared for increased numbers of projects, which will likely require investment funding and increased staffing. So we think we're on our way, and it's a brave new world, and we're just anxious to get on with it.
Well, Peter, it's pretty exciting. I know when you've got the kind of numbers that you're talking about and the kind of focus and the obvious subject matter expertise, a combination of that, you know, they talk about what's the magic formula. Sounds to me like you've got it. So continued best of luck and continued success with LifeSpan. And also, I got to tell you, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for a few minutes today on Tech Talk.
Frank, it's been my pleasure very much, and have a great week, okay?